Today, James Dean is as recognizable around the world as Coca-Cola. He's an American icon, a role model, a brooding sex symbol, a trailblazing rebel. But who was he? And why is he still such a vital presence?
I think he was pure gold. I mean, that image that he created on the screen, the three roles that he played are as contemporary today as they were when they were made.
I think he tried to find, search, and educate himself through discovering the truth in front of an audience. That's what the best actors do.
It might seem a wild exaggeration to claim that a movie star changed our society, but this is exactly what James Dean did.
Not only did he create the first believable adolescent on film, but he's the very beginning of the culture that we're still in, the pop culture that began in the mid-50s. And it permeates everything in our society and around the world.
He looks out at us from his films and photographs, as contemporary today as when he died 50 years ago. But how did a 24-year-old actor who only made 3 films become a legend? And why do we still ask questions about his sexuality and his death?
I think it's important to remember that neither Jim Morrison nor James Dean committed suicide. Their deaths resulted as a direct result of a lifestyle that did not possess in its vocabulary the words compromise, or stop.
He arrived in the 50s when everything seemed to be perfect on the surface. America had all those beautiful cars, everything was looking really fantastic, and he looked the part, but he despised it all, and he wanted it all overturned. And he became the ideal person to represent a whole range of things that were important to American youth at the time. Rock and roll, fast cars, he was the film Elvis.
He was the Abraham Lincoln of adolescence. He freed the teenagers. At the time, young people had no voice. Until James Dean came along, no one listened to them, and their problems were ignored.
You're tearing me apart!
What?
You say one thing, he says another, and everybody changes back again!
He was the image of all that frustration out of which a lot of great rock and roll is born. No wonder Dylan loves James Dean. No wonder Axl Rose carries, the Mutant King around in his back pocket. No wonder Bruce looks like he does. No wonder we're all still wearing T-shirts. Crimes, I got one on today.
He made adolescent defiance heroic. Before James Dean, adolescence was considered a burden. James Dean made it look positively desirable, and after him, nobody wanted to grow up. He would prove an endlessly durable role model as each successive generation claimed him for their own. He was the beginning of the youth culture, and we are still absorbing his shockwaves. Before James Dean, teenagers were portrayed in cliches, either as cute Bobby Soxers or juvenile delinquents. Then along came Rebel Without a Cause. In Rebel, Jimmy portrayed a defiant teenager fighting the hypocrisy of his family and society. He made an awkward stage of growing up look sympathetic and real. No wonder James Dean became the rallying point for teenagers who could identify each other by their provocative style: boots, blue jeans, t-shirt, hair, and just plain attitude. He articulated what every teenager felt, but couldn't express.
Boy, if I had one day when I didn't have to be all confused and I didn't have to feel that I was ashamed of everything, if I felt that I belonged someplace, then...
Like any teenager, Jimmy was a mass of contradictions. He was an Indiana farm boy, a New York intellectual, a Hollywood movie star. He so immersed himself in his roles, you never knew where the screen character ended and the real James Dean began. James Dean was born in 1931 in Marion, Indiana. Soon after, the family moved to the nearby farming community of Fairmount. Because his father, Winton Dean, a dental technician, had a decent job, the Deans were relatively untouched by the Depression. In 1935, Winton moved the family to Los Angeles. As an only child, Jimmy formed a very close bond with his mother, Mildred. She had a great love for the arts and life, which she instilled in Jimmy.
His mother was a real petite little lady, and she had real sparkling eyes and a great big smile, and she was just a fun person. She had lots of energy, so he got this, from her, and she would come and she would mimic the neighbors, and we would just think that's hilarious, and of course what he could do.
When Jimmy was just 9 years old, his mother became very sick, and in a few short months, died of cancer. She was only 29. Unable to handle the loss of his wife and raise a son, Jimmy's father sent him back to Fairmount. Jimmy was extremely upset by the loss of his mother. On the train, he got off at every stop, running ahead to make sure that the car carrying her coffin was still there. When he arrived in Fairmount, he asked the conductor for this cup and saucer from the trip. Jimmy was to be raised by his father's sister, Hortense, and her husband, Marcus Winslow.
When his mother passed away, he came to live with us. And he was 9, and I was 14. Well, he was an only child, and I was an only child. So we fought for position for quite a while.
Fairmount is a small town primarily inhabited by Quakers, whose tolerant attitude encouraged a person to pursue, without criticism, whatever he or she was interested in. Jimmy's aunt and uncle became the parents he had lost. His uncle Marcus put up a basketball net in the barn and built a pole vault pit for Jimmy to practice in. As the new boy in town, he felt the need to prove himself and be accepted. Jimmy was neither the fastest, tallest, or most gifted athlete, but he still lettered in baseball and basketball and was a high school track star. At 5'8", he was nearly the shortest player on the basketball team. He broke 15 pairs of eyeglasses and 2 front teeth in his determination to succeed. When Jimmy was 10, one of the barn floors was cemented over. Jimmy decided to leave his mark by putting his hand and footprints and the words Jim Dean, 1941, in the wet cement.
Jim was the type of person that anything he did, he wanted to be the best. He would pursue it till he could master it. I know there were times when we would be ice skating out the farm there on the pond. We'd take a break to tell a few stories around the fire while Jim would be out there practicing. Not to make himself better than us, just to better himself.
His uncle gave him his first motorbike at 17, and typical of teenagers, Jimmy drove it around as fast as he could.
We always called it the popsicle because it had kind of a little pop, pop, pop to it, and every time you could hear him come down out of town, and when he got to the cemetery, well, that curve of the cemetery, I don't know what he did different, but we'd always say, well, there goes Jimmy on his popsicle,
In an assignment for one of his classes in high school, Jimmy wrote, "Most of all, I like art, to mold and create things with my hands. I think my life will be devoted to art and dramatics." In the 7th grade, Hortense Winslow had persuaded Jimmy to do a reading for the Women's Christian Temperance Union. He enjoyed the attention and gained the confidence to do frequent readings at the Back Creek Church. His acting talent, first glimpsed in a portrayal in Goon with the Wind, became more obvious when he performed The Madman by Charles Dickens in the National Forensic League state contest. He took first-place honors, startling the judges with his unorthodox choice of material and a performance that began with a blood-curdling scream. He would later say, "My whole life has been spent in dramatic displays of expression." Jimmy had tasted fame, and it tantalized him. He had talent, and it would lead him out of his small town and all that he knew. After graduation, Jimmy went to live with his father in Los Angeles and studied acting at UCLA. Jimmy was determined to learn more about acting than the traditional approach the school offered. He sought out James Whitmore, who was teaching Stanislavski's experimental acting technique. His father was a reserved and cautious man who saw Jimmy's acting ambition as sheer folly. In his first professional acting job, he received $30 for a Pepsi Cola commercial.
Pepsi Cola hits the spot, a big bottle and it's got bounce, bounce, bounce.
He later appeared on television in Hill No. 1, playing the Apostle St. John. The girls at a local convent, enamored by the attractive apostle, formed Jimmy's first fan club.
Back to Galilee, where we belong. Good suggestion, Andrew. Well spoken, Andrew.
Now that's wisdom. Surely we did not spend 3 years following the Master to return again to our nets. Was it for this the Master sent us out to cure the sick, cast out devils?
James Whitmore advised Jimmy that if he was serious about acting, he should go to New York and try out for the Actors Studio. Jimmy picked up his few belongings and, against his father's wishes, went to New York. Intimidated at first by its sheer size, New York had an exhilarating impact on Jimmy. He soon immersed himself in its energy. He read voraciously and began the process of fitting into the more intellectual society in which he found himself. Jimmy lived in one austere room in the Iroquois Hotel. He was often penniless, but he never compromised and wouldn't consider jobs outside theater or television.
And we used to hang out at the Cromwell drugstore downstairs in the NBC building in New York. And we could sit there all day complaining why we weren't discovered, or somebody had no talent, or God knows what. Then they put the limit up to $1 to get the actors out, and it got us out.
When he auditioned for the Actors Studio, his performance was so compelling that out of the hundreds of applicants, he and his scene partner were the only 2 people accepted. Jimmy observed classes but did not participate. He couldn't bear to have his performance criticized by the class. He said, "If I let them dissect me like a rabbit in a laboratory, I might not be able to produce again." At the Actors Studio, aspiring actors studied method acting, where an actor learns to utilize every emotion from their real life in their dramatic roles. Although this line between acting and life was deliberately left ambiguous, students were warned never to confuse the two. Jimmy repeatedly violated this rule. He succumbed to what the method called the existential fallacy of confusing himself with his creation. It gave a sense of urgency and risk to all his roles. In the 50s, live television plays were the training ground for actors, writers, and directors. Jimmy was cast in over 30 of these dramas.
Hello, I'm James Dean. Welcome to the Schlitz Playhouse of Stars. Our play is the story of a young man named Jeffrey Latham, who opened the door of a very ordinary, innocent-looking roadside diner, and he found his whole life changed. You pushed the car into the water with the trooper still inside of it?
Jimmy just played what he felt and responded to other people with exact truth. he was a totally honest actor and a very sweet guy.
Jimmy made his first appearance on Broadway in See the Jaguar. He played a simple-minded teenager captured and caged by the local bully. The play lasted only 5 days, but garnered him good reviews.
He was talented and gifted and sensitive, and sometimes impossible. My wife says that when she and E.G. Marshall were in a television show with young James Dean, he took a lot of the rehearsal time, and E.G. Marshall said, "He's going to be a big star." And my wife said, "Why?" He said, "Because he's impossible, because he makes demands."
The restaurant on top of the Museum of Modern Art was a favorite hangout for Jimmy and his friends. Among them, composer Leonard Rosenman, who would later create the soundtracks for both East of Eden and Rebel Without a Cause.
About 11 o'clock in the evening, the doorbell rings, and I said, "Who the heck is that?" And I opened up the door, and there's a guy standing there in black leather. It looked like something out of the Nazi Germany kind of thing. He said, "I'd like to study piano with you." I said, "Come on in." That's how we met. He couldn't understand, for example, why, without knowing how to play a scale even, or reading notes, he couldn't play Opus 111 of Beethoven, which was one of the most difficult sonatas ever done.
Jimmy's big break came when he got the part of Bakir in the Broadway play The Immoralist. As a homosexual Arab boy, his seductive scissor dance created a sensation, but also fueled rumors about his sexuality. According to Dizzy Sheridan, his girlfriend at the time, Jimmy told her that he had a homosexual relationship with a producer while he was in New York, but uncomfortable with this, he'd ended it. When confronted about his sexuality, Jimmy shrugged it off, saying, "Why go through life with one hand tied behind your back?"
His androgynous style is the prototype, actually, for all rock stars, from Elvis to Mick Jagger to David Bowie.
Unpredictable as ever, Jimmy never read a line the same way twice, frustrating the producer and director.
He used to say, "I think that the secret of acting is not to know the lines too well." I always remembered him saying that. I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, if you don't know the lines and you have to search," he said, "then it comes out much more real."
Jimmy's performance earned him the Bloom Award as Best Newcomer on Broadway. Just days after the opening of The Immoralist, Jimmy delivered surprising news to the rest of the cast. He was quitting the play to go to Hollywood. He had been cast by Elia Kazan to play Cal in East of Eden, based on the best-selling novel by John Steinbeck.
Thanks very much for taking care of me. I appreciate it. I enjoyed it very much.
So did I.
Even though he already had the role of Cal, in this screen test with actress Joanne Woodward playing his brother's girlfriend, Jimmy holds nothing back in his acting. In wardrobe tests, it's Jimmy who grabs the attention, here fooling around with co-star Julie Harris. It was a stroke of genius on Kazan's part to cast the 23-year-old Dean as Cal Trask. Jimmy was Cal Trask. From the moment we catch sight of him prowling the streets of Monterey, he's a hypnotic presence. Kazan, who had been a method actor himself, was able to draw out the raw emotions Jimmy felt for his real mother and transfer them to Jo Van Fleet, his mother in the film.
Get
I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you. Talk to me. Talk to me, please. Mother.
East of Eden was filmed on location in Mendocino, California, which doubled for Monterey. This never-before-seen footage was shot by local resident Addie Reese. The footage captures not only life on the set, but also Jimmy's warmth and sense of fun. In preparation for the role, Kazan arranged for Jimmy to stay with Monty Roberts, an actor also working on the film who lived in the area, and introduced Jimmy to life on the Monterey Peninsula.
I can recall so distinctly going to the first dailies and sitting there with a man named Kazan, who I revered, and feeling sorry for him that he had made this commitment to do this film with this kid, but it was going to be sad because this poor kid was going to be found out to be a non-actor. And I watched about 10 minutes and I went, whoa, wait a minute.
Why don't you give Dad a chance? Why don't you show him that you love him?
How?
It's so easy. Just tell him. Show him. Why don't you do something for him?
"10 minutes into those dailies, I knew that we were in the presence of greatness, that he could come across on that screen unbelievably real.
Jimmy's need for acceptance from his own father had never been expressed, but instead, it waited for release in the poignant relationship with a distant father played by Raymond Massey in East of Eden.
I don't want the money, Cal. I couldn't take it. I thank you for the thought, but
I'll keep it for you. I'll wrap it up and we'll just keep it in here and then
I'll never take it. Son.
He was able to expose the emotion on screen that he couldn't show in real life. And the intimacy in this improvised moment is disturbing to watch.
Cal! Cal!
Despite the cast of established stars, Jimmy's powerful performance as the complex character of Cal Trask stirred up so much excitement that by the time East of Eden opened around the world, his name was listed above the title. During the making of East of Eden, Jimmy met Italian actress Pier Angeli, the great love of his life.